Hey, this is Stuchiu, and for today's video, I wanted to talk about some takeaways from Liquid's run at IEM Sydney. And they went there, they won the finals, and they kind of broke the ongoing narrative that they're chokers in the finals, that basically they fall under the pressure, and when it counts them they get to that stage, they kind of like fade away from it. They don't perform as well under the pressure. That I won't say that's completely gone, because I think I don't think that is ever truly gone. And the obvious example I'll give is Jaedong from Brood War to StarCraft 2. So Jaedong is actually one of the greatest Brood War players of all time. I have him ranked as second after Flash, basically. And he is one of the greatest champions Brood War has ever produced. But when he transferred over to StarCraft 2, there was this period of time in 2013 where he got to the finals, and then I'd say he straight up choked in multiple cases. And outside of his one victory against Scarlet, he basically lost all his finals in StarCraft 2. So in my mind, I just don't know if I just don't know if that pressure ever goes away. But I will say in general, after you've done it the first time, it's easier to do it the second and third and fourth time, if you're good enough, that is. Now, on to the main point of this video. I wanted to talk about Liquid in terms of strategy and in terms of tactics and what I saw at IEM Sydney. And I thought this was a good time to do it because they've gone to like 5 different tournaments now. And Abai Power Masters, kind of a shit show. The 2 blast events and were basically mostly best of ones with 2 best of 3 finals. The major was best of 1 group stage, 1 best of 3, and then a best of 3 in the round of 8 against ENCE, where they lost that. So there wasn't that much data to go off of to try to figure out what exactly Liquid were trying to do with their lineup. And I was personally curious because this lineup is one of the most stacked in history, I think, with Naf, Nitro, Leech, Stewie 2K, and Twist. Like, if you're just talking about NA, this is clearly the best NA lineup that's ever been configured in its history. If you're just talking about overall history, I think in terms of firepower, this lineup stacks up with almost any lineup you want to throw up there. Like, it's competitive, at least. It's in the conversation. And I think right now in this time period, I think man for man, it has the most firepower in the world. I think it's better than FaZe. I think it's better than Na'Vi because while, Simple is good, Edward and Zeus are on that team. It's better than Astralis just in terms of individual skill. And individual skill meaning mechanical pop-off ability, I guess. And I think individual game sense, they're right up there as well. So I think, like, I'll put it this way: if you made a Hall of Fame for NA CS:GO players, like, these 5 players would be in like the top 6 or 7 names in that fucking hall, right? So it's a ridiculous lineup. And so I've wanted to figure out how exactly they were going to configure it, because if you looked at last year, I thought the win conditions were pretty obvious. The win condition was a Liege will be your consistent like entry fragger, and then after that you have Twist or Naf as your primary carry conditions, with Naf being more of like a lurker, a passive player, somebody who's very good in the mid-round, late round, kind of like a Coldzera-esque player, except more aggressive, he's more in your face than, like, Coldzera is like a master of CS, whereas like Naf kind of like, there are certain moments where when he goes in, he fucking goes in, and it completely surprises the other player. He has a very strong intuitive sense of when to go in, like when to go ham, basically. And his impact is off the fucking charts. Twist, on the other hand, is mechanically the best NA player I've seen, period. So if you're putting him on the T side, if you're putting him on the entry, he's gonna get like a kill with his one taps. And if you put him on the CT side, if you put him somewhere like Pit, he's probably going to get like 2 kills every time somebody goes to his side of the map. So just in terms of raw firepower, I think Twist is probably the best we've seen in NA history. And largely speaking, the strategy, I guess, of Liquid hasn't changed that much. What has changed is they are simultaneously more loose and more tactical than they were before. And that's a really odd it's like a really odd combination. It's why I've taken so long to do a video about Liquid, is because they are a team that have technically everything except for, I guess, the winning mentality. But even then, like, they just beat Fnatic, and Fnatic was a pretty good team. So outside of Straws, I think Liquid are the second best team in the world. I think they were in 2018 also, but that's a different topic. So what I mean by Liquid has everything, I think if you just look at individually man for man, and the way the roster is constructed, it's very like, I think this is basically the apex of what Zeus was going for when he initially did the roster swap of kicking out JD. Actually, I don't know if Zeus did it, but when Liquid basically decided to remove JDM for NAF, I think that was the move. And basically the idea at that time was you have Nitro pick up the op when you have to, or when you need to. And then for the most part, you're going to rely on a bunch of variable riflers. And by doing this style of a bunch of riflers, you're going to have a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot more freedom in your setups, a lot more freedom in your defaults, a lot more freedom in the positions and the rules. And this is basically how Liquid this is one of the reasons why Liquid were so consistent last year, is because every time they ran into a particular rut, they could just switch roles between the players and the positions between the players if they no longer felt like they were doing that much in the role, give a new look, give a fresh outtake. And the reason this worked so well under Zeus was because of the Taco, Nitro, Zeus like combination of those three. Basically, Nitro was the in-game leader. Taco was a very consistent, like, supportive player who could fill out all the roles that the other Liquid players didn't want. And then Zeus was kind of like the defining culture guy who was kind of like keeping the mentality together and all that shit, right? And so I thought you were going to lose a lot. My initial assumption when this change happened at the end of 2018 to 2019, when Zeus, Taco leave for MIBR, Adren, Stuchiu come in to take their place after those two leave. The initial assumption was the ceiling will go up because we know Stuchiu, at least mechanically, is a better player than Taco. And I think in terms of just game impact, no, actually, game impact is the wrong word. In terms of playmaking, he's a better player than Taco. I think game impact, they have their impact is wildly different from each other, that it's not really comparable in this particular case. But basically, Stuchiu is more of is closer to a feed and famine player than Taco is, whereas Taco, you know what you're going to get out of him every single game, every single series, basically. And then the other addition was Adren, and Adren was a question mark for me because I know a lot of people rate him pretty high tactically, but when I saw him in Liquid when he first played, he was a very default head centric style. But as time has gone on in this year, I think Adren's already proven tactically he's very good. He's already helped this Liquid lineup a lot, and it's hard to say what exactly is his ideas and what exactly is like Nitro's ideas or Stewie's or whatever. But as far as I can see, Adren has included a lot more variations and a lot more defaults and setups on the CT side and T side, and this has basically opened up a lot of different avenues, a lot of different approaches and avenues that the entire team can play around. And when I look at this particular lineup, as I said before, strategically, there are three main factors: are Liege, Twist, and NAF, and I think that's been the same here. And even though my initial assumption was that moving Taco would potentially lower their floor, it hasn't happened yet. And I think there are two reasons why. The first is Nitro, as a player, is just really good again. Like, he's really, really good for a leader. I think he's basically the second best fragging leader outside of Glaive, and I think it's arguable he's better than Glaive already just in terms of raw fragging. And if you're looking at the other reasons, basically, I think like it's not Stuchiu himself; it's the interdependencies of what's happened after Stuchiu entered this team. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is basically no single player could fulfill all of Taco's roles at the level Taco was playing at. So instead, they've kind of split up the various roles across the team. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, what's the best example of this? Right, so if Stewie 2K wants to play the op on Mirage, right? Then in order for him to play that, somebody else has to play the B anchor site, because in general you don't want your primary op to be stuck in the B site most of the time, because you have way more pick potential in mid, you have way more pick potential on the A site, or if you're pushing Palace or you're pushing T connector or whatever, right? And in that situation, then that's when you kind of need a Taco in that instance. But instead, from what I've seen, Liquid have like varied as to who actually plays that role. Nitro can play it, Naf can play it. Twist initially played it in the finals against Fnatic. Alicia played that role. So basically, that's kind of where I'm getting at. As in, this team is looser than they were before, where the roles are far less defined. I think they're basically just sharing sharing most of the roles, and they have very like polarized. Not very polarized. They have like very specific niche areas where some of the players specialize in. So, I think Naf and Elige are the two most polarized of the five. So, Elige in general, they almost always want him to be looking for the initial play make in the 5v5, 4v5 situations. And Naf, they almost always want him to play the mid round and late round, because he's by far their best player in that situation, and he's their most surprising player in that situation. So between the two of them, they're kind of strategically the most important players in this lineup. But just in general, they're not really playing towards designated roles. So in that sense, this Liquid lineup is very different. Is actually very different from Astralis, and actually closer to, I'd argue, to the old Fnatic lineups, particularly the Dentist version, where they like shifted roles all the time and shifted the op all the time. And this has its benefits. Like if you're looking at this Liquid in general, like if you look at the op, basically it flows between three different players: Stewie 2K, Naf, and Nitro. And they each have different styles and strengths. So Naf, for instance, I think he's actually very good in high pressure situations where you need to make something happen. I think he's the best of the three. Stewie 2K is better in general, just getting picks, and probably better at anchoring sites than either Nitro or Naf. Whereas Nitro is probably the best at playing a consistent supportive style with the op compared to the other two. So they switch it around a lot of times, and this also gives them a lot of variations in their double op setups, because of their distinct styles. They have a lot more varied looks, and so even if they run like a similar setup with a double op setup, it changes based off of which two of these three players gets the ops, and the third player himself can also changes exactly how the round plays out. For instance, like Naf with the op, basically he's not going to be nearly as impactful in the mid to late rounds with the op compared to when he has the rifle. Whereas, so if you have like Naf and Stewie 2K with the op, then in that case Nitro is way more likely to do an aggressive play with a leash, right? If you go the other way, basically Stewie 2K is, if you go with like Nitro and Naf, then you have one side that's going to be more passive, hold the angle. The other side is going to play for picks, and then Stewie 2K is going to have a much better, basically Liquid, actually not Stewie 2K per se, but Liquid's going to have a much more aggressive B side hold, where they're gonna play for more information in the mid round, late round, and call for the rotations and stuff like that. Because I think in general, when you look at the rotations, they get better rotations off of their B side when Stuchiu is not on the op, just in general. So it's Liquid's a very strange lineup, because in terms of roles and role designation, it's way looser than before. But in terms of its tactics, I think I don't want to say it's necessarily more tactical, but it has more diversity to it. It has more looks, it has more approaches, and this is because of the inclusion of Stuchiu and the inclusion of Adren in my view. And what's interesting about this Liquid lineup is, just as a team, they're very similar to Astralis in the sense that they have every avenue of win condition open to them. And what I mean by that is, if they want to play a very loose, aggressive, individualistic style, they can do that. They have the players to do that. If they want to play towards more of a team play approach style, they can do that, because in general they 4 of the 5 players have been playing together for over a year now, and they can really play that kind of style. They're very good at it. If you're looking at a tactical style, like I said, I think their defaults, I think some of their executes are pretty good, so they can play towards that style as well. So they have a lot of different choices they can pick from, and that makes them a very dangerous opponent. But it also means, for Liquid specifically, it's difficult for them to choose which way they want to play in any particular situation. And I think that's basically why they kind of screwed themselves over when they played against FaZe at Blast Finals. Now, I will say they choked, and I think individually they all played poorly. But if you're just looking at it from a strategical point of view, they basically try to play the individualistic dueling style straight up against FaZe. And the reason I can say that is because the map veto ended up in such a way where they played Mirage and Dust 2, both individualistic maps, both maps where they somehow let FaZe have their best comfort maps for Nico as an in-game leader. So it was just I just think strategically that was just a bad choice. And I think that's kind of a symptom of the fact that they don't really have a very obvious win condition that they must play towards to, because they have so many choices they can pick out of. They're very, in that sense, I guess, like, they're a bit different than Astralis, because even though Astralis can play basically anything, they almost always prefer very heavily structured styles that are tailored towards their opponents. Whereas Liquid, they don't necessarily tailor themselves towards their opponents that often, and I don't think they need to. So even though they're similar in one aspect, their approaches are slightly different. So I will say this about Liquid: it's kind of just in terms of what's the word I'm looking for? Just in terms of historical lineage, I think it's a very fitting lineup to have this kind of style, because if you look at this lineup, outside of when you look at this lineup, basically the core of this lineup, not the core, the survivors of Liquid are basically Nitro and Elige, right? And their initial play style comes from Adren, I'd say, in the initial Liquid lineup, where basically Adren taught them a very structured, very default oriented style, and that's been the base of their style. And Naf and Stuchiu come from more of a loose style. So Naf, basically, he reaches his apex under Stanislaus as an in-game leader, and Daps had yet to fully develop his own style. And Stewie 2K was the leader of Cloud9, and both of them are very good at this kind of loose aggressive style. So that's kind of where I think the historical lineage comes from both of these aspects. So I just think it's very fitting that all these different ideas have culminated into this one lineup, and you have the ultimate NA super team. And so how does this style work out in their map pool? Is here, let me break it down for you. So you have their best map is Overpass by far. I think they are. Are they better than Navi and Simple? I think they probably are. I think Liquid is probably the best Overpass map right now. Overpass team right now. Outside of that, they have four maps they're pretty good on: Inferno, Mirage, Dust 2, and Nuke. They can also play Cash. I just don't think they're that good on it, and I don't think they necessarily have to work on it that much because Cash is going out. And they ban Train. And so when you basically look at their map pool, I think I don't know what they think about it, but I think in general, Overpass, Inferno, Mirage, and Dust 2 are their 4 better maps. And the reason I think those 4 maps suit them the most is because I think it allows for it allows them to use their best style, their individual strengths to the highest level. So you can play individualistic and structured on basically all those maps. Whereas with Nuke, outside of the CT side, where Elige can go off playing, Elige or Stuchiu can go off with individual plays. For the most part, that's more of a structured map. And then with Cash, nobody has ever really figured out how to structurally play that map on the CT side. So in that sense, they're more reliant on their individual skill. And then Train is more of a structured map. And, well, I personally think they should play it. They don't need to right now. So, and I actually think if you're just looking at the pure metagame, a lot of teams are trying to pick up Train to punish the Astralis. And the Astralis themselves actually have a pretty decent Train, so it doesn't make that much sense for Liquid to hone in on Train anyway, even if they have the pieces to be good on it. Now, let's look at a few teams and look at not going to go too in depth on the series because there's a lot of maps that are played here, but basically if you just look at the IEM Sydney run, the 3 best of 3s you want to look at are Liquid versus NIP, Liquid versus MIBR, and Liquid versus Fnatic. And in these maps, basically, Liquid beats NIP on Nuke and Overpass. Liquid beats MIBR on Mirage and Nuke. And then Liquid 3-2 Fnatic, winning on Overpass, Mirage, Inferno, losing on Cash and Dust 2. And let's go over this one by one. So when you play Liquid against NIP, what are the win conditions for both teams? Well, Liquid can play anything, like I've pointed out, but let's look at NIP. What are NIP's specific conditions? And in that way, we can figure out what Liquid's conditions are. So NIP, in general, their best 2 players are Forest and Rez. And I think if you're looking at that team, they have to play a very what's the word I'm looking for? They play a very default centric style, and they play towards a lot of team play stuff. And what I mean by that is like they focus a lot on trading. They focus a lot on buying space, and then giving that space to Forest, and Forest getting the kills, kind of. And so when you're playing that style, it's kind of limiting. And what I mean by that is, what's the best way I can think of it? Like basically NIP's best strengths are their team play and their individual skill, but their individual skill is inhibited by the fact that they don't really have a good system or a good tactical base in order to exemplify that skill. So like if you're just looking at it from a strategic point of view, basically Liquid don't really need to do that much to beat NIP. They just need to play the normal game, and it should be fine. And it's basically what happened here. Like NIP, let me check the map video real quick, but I'm pretty sure NIP would pick Nuke, and then Liquid pick Overpass. That makes the most sense. And so when you run into it that way, the problem with this is that while NIP is a good Nuke team, in terms of in terms of the tactical side, they were always going to lose. They were always going to lose out. And basically the problem for NIP dealing with Liquid's T side is that Liquid have too many variations on their T side for NIP to really deal with. So when they run the typical yard smokes, they basically have I've counted like 7 different variations of what they can do off of the yard smoke, and so it requires a lot of aggression on the NIP side to get information in other ways or other areas of the map in order to try to figure out what exactly Liquid is doing in any given round. And if you're going to do that, you're just going to you're basically running into a bunch of individual duels at some points, and Liquid is going to win out on that. And at the same time, basically, NIP don't have a very good opper. A very good opper is one way you can kind of get at Liquid, and it's one of the reasons why Device has always been a particular thorn in Liquid's side. But NIP just don't have one, so it was always going to be difficult in that sense. So even though NIP played them fairly close, in general, this is exactly how you'd imagine the series would go out. Liquid just kind of beat them with a normal game, move on. You then go to Liquid versus MIBR, and this is a series where I think, I just think it's an informational. Well, it's a few things. Liquid is obviously a better team. I think individually they're all better players, basically at this moment, and I think it's also an information. There's some informational disadvantage here. So when you look at the MIBR versus Mouse series, MIBR basically pulled out all the tricks on Mirage, and while Liquid didn't hardcore anti-strat MIBR, they did recognize a few patterns. Specifically, they recognized all of the first CT side aggressive patterns that MIBR like to run, and are running again. And so if you keep running that, like, it worked against Mouse because those players on that Mouse side, outside of Chris J and Kerrigan, they're fairly young. Like, I know Rops has played for a while, I know Woxic's played for a little bit, and Frozen's completely new. And so it's the first time that basically they've run into like first timings at the outside. Yeah, I think basically it's the first time they've ever run. All 3 of them have ever run into like for aggressive CT side. If you're talking about Rops, Woxic, and Frozen, because I don't think any of them really played against Fur in his prime in 2017. So I think whereas I think Liquid have, and Liquid at times were able to like beat it or curb it so to an extent. So that's a very different experience level there. Another thing to note is that MIBR is using this funny. This only counts for one round, basically. Basically, MIBR they use the they execute on the A site and cut off and use smokes to cut off jungle and connector. And the whole point of this is basically it's going to cause the CT side to rotate towards that side, and then MIBR then flank either with 2 players coming out from underpass or 2 players or 3 players coming from mid to kill it. And in order for Liquid to deal this tactically, they basically just kept some smokes up, and then when those nades came in, they instantly counter-naded the 2 players on the A side counter-naded the T ramp and then the palace area, and then this allowed the players in mid to like focus their crosshairs towards the mid angle and then basically wipe out MIBR. So if you're just looking at the Mirage map, I think Liquid were just tactically above MIBR there, and that's, like I said, due to like partly due to the schedule. I think it's just in general Liquid's a better team anyway, so I don't think it would have changed much even if they hadn't seen that map. As for Nuke, I know MIBR is really working on it, and I think they're a better team on it than they were before, but it's just not. It just doesn't suit Ferv that well, in my opinion. I guess that's my biggest concern. Like, I just don't think like, all right, so I'm gonna go off a tangent here, I guess, because I think MIBR is still trying to find a new identity they can play around, and the way they ran it at Sydney was by using coldzera as more of an aggressive player, and in order to do that, they have like Taco flashing him in and stuff. And while it's shown pretty decent success here, I don't know if that's really a long-term solution. And basically kind of ran out of gas against Liquid just in general. So if you're just looking at the way MIBR and Liquid play strategically, MIBR rely a lot on the CT side aggression, particularly late round, but sometimes mid round with Fur. And on the T side, they still rely a lot on their slow default style. And Liquid right now just aren't going to fall for that. I think Liquid have gone way too accustomed to that kind of style, and they know when they can get aggressive. They know where to push, and all their players have built up a lot of experience against that kind of style because they've all played against MIBR. In Stewie's case, he played with MIBR, so they all have a pretty good sense of it. So in general, I just don't think it was ever going to be a very good matchup for MIBR for Liquid. And they go to Fnatic. And Fnatic is... If I had to describe Fnatic, I'd say that you just look at their game versus NIP, and that kind of describes Fnatic at their best, which is this team isn't tactically that deep. Like, I feel like Exist still plays too many risky moves and whatnot, and it gets punished against more structured teams. But in general, it relies a lot on individual players making plays, and it relies a lot on the individual game sense of those players on that day. And so if you get them in a scrappy situation, the Fnatic players are on form. And what I mean by that is, like, JW is really reading the map, so his wildcard aggressive plays are really making an impact. Crims is basically typical consistent Crims, like really reading the map, getting his consistent frags in. Exist is getting his like ridiculous clutches in. Like, this was basically a throwback tournament for Exist, and something you shouldn't expect, but it just happened. And then Twist, even though his like stats are bad, like, he does fill all the roles that they need in order for the other four players to not the other four, like Brolan, Crims, and JW to go off like this. So he does fill a role for the team, and I think he just generally does a good job in that sense. But basically, if you look at it, if you look at Fnatic that way, and you think about the fact that they're highly dependent on individual form and game sense, then I think it's just a bad matchup, because I think Liquid meet them head to head and come out on top. I think like JW isn't like a normal like JW and Twist like share the op, but if you compare them like the three ops of Nitro, NAF, StuTK, I don't think it's that different. If you look at their individual riflers, I think Liquid's riflers are all superior to Fnatic's riflers, except for Crims, basically. So I just think like Fnatic had a puncher's chance in this final, but like Liquid basically didn't have to strategically do anything crazy here. They just had to play their own game, and that's basically what happened. Like, you look at the maps. Basically, you go to Cache. I think that's Fnatic's map. Fair enough. Overpass, they have a very close map, but Liquid comes out on top. Mirage, clearly a better Liquid map. Now, Dust 2 was a weird one, because I think Dust 2 is a better Liquid map, but the variance of that map is always very iffy and up in the air, in my view. Like, even the best Dust 2 teams can't hold on to that map for very long. So I'd have to go back and see if there's anything specific about that map, but I don't think there was. I just think Liquid were kind of blown out. But then you go to Inferno, and Liquid blow out Fnatic on the CT side, because like I said, it relies a lot on individual skill, a lot on game sense, and if that's not clicking on a particular map, like as it didn't for Fnatic on Inferno, then they just die. And so that's kind of how Liquid win this one, win IEM Sydney. And I will say this on a final note, I think one final thing that I guess you want to take forward is if they get to another game 5 or game 3 in a finals and they're up this many rounds, look out and see if they start rushing things. Like it felt like basically after Liquid got, really rolled on that Inferno, they basically just try to end the game early with rushes and cheeses. They're like, oh, we'll just go top mid, pop flash through. Oh, we'll just pop flash through this B smoke and try to kill Fnatic that way. And it didn't work, and it was looking real iffy. But then Liquid won that pistol round and then just won the game. Right. So overall, what do I think of? What are the things you want to take away about Liquid? Basically, I think their 3 main players are still the same: Elige, Naf, and Twist. I think they've gotten over the taco problem by divvying up the roles between their all 5 players. Like mostly, Stuchiu takes care of it in most cases, but when they want Stuchiu to play a more aggressive role, like nuke on ramp, like they give him the fucking opposite shit, or if they on Mirage they made him the opper, then you'll see other players shift into his roles and take care of it, and it's completely fine. Like they don't give out kills or anything, and they know how to play that role. That's something to keep in consideration. In general, basically, Liquid have a lot of the old style Liquid, very structured, very set default gameplay, but they've also included more of the aggressive loose style that Stuchiu and Naf bring to the team. I just think in general they have a lot of tools at their disposal, so they should be the second best team in the world, and really nobody should be able to beat Liquid except for themselves at this point, except for Astralis. So as Astralis is not playing in any of these not in playing in a bunch of these bigger tournaments, whichever tournaments Liquid goes to where Astralis isn't, they have to win it. I think that's the expectation for them now. And is there anything else I want to point out? Oh, yeah. In general, you want to look out for... I think this team is going to be very different from... Not very different, but a little different from the old Liquid lineup. In that in the old Liquid lineup, even if the roles changed, you kind of knew what Liquid was planning to do. And this is one of the reasons why Astralis kind of killed them. In this Liquid lineup, I think they're going to take those events off. And then when they come back for the bigger tournaments, they're going to change a lot of their T sides or CT sides in terms of roles, in terms of tactics, in terms of positions. Like we've already seen it with Mirage. Basically, their Mirage has already undergone 2 different revisions. In the first one, when Stuchiu came in, he was actually playing A side. He basically took Twist roles, and Twist took the B side anchor. In the second revision, they reversed that, and then in the third edition, they had Stuchiu play the opper, and they had Elige, Nitro, and Naf switch off in terms of playing the B anchor or playing short, while Stewie was playing the op. So I think that's the key. I think that's going to be what defines Liquid going forward, is this kind of formless sort of CSGO style where outside of really Elige and Naf, Elige being the opener, Naf being the closer, I don't think any of these players really have that many designated hard roles they have to fulfill. So that's about it. Those are my thoughts about Liquid. See you guys later.